This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 543, entitled Masculist Bam 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 Revenge Against Fluffies and Fluffie Feminists. Description. This flyer shows how masculists can use their big three arguments, their bam 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 arguments, to show that women oppress men worse than vice versa, so that millions of masculisted men become very angry and impatient with fluffies and monoconscious feminists and revenge them viciously for their monoconscious oppression of men that is worse than vice versa. The flyer itself. Masculist Bam 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 Revenge Against Fluffies and Fluffie Feminists by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. You've probably heard the expression that there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time is ripe. Men have been subject to the misandry of feminists for the past 6 decades, being told that men are pigs, men are rapists, men are toxic, and the like, that men are morally inferior, etc. Open-minded men, especially bi-conscious masculists, who have studied both how men oppress women and how women oppress men, are very aware of how men gender oppress women, with men's rape of women, men's sexual harassment of women, men's domestic violence against women, etc. So have become increasingly frustrated and angry at the way nearly all feminists see gender oppression as a one-way street. So feel justified at displaying feminist anger at men publicly, lashing out at men for men's gender oppression of women. Now along comes masculism, and suddenly men have their own gender political ideology that preaches to men that in reality women oppress men worse than vice versa, since many of women's gender crimes against men last decades, which makes them a lot more serious than the relatively minor ways that men oppress women. So, once millions of men become masculisted by having absorbed the main masculist ideas, these men are then in a position to get their revenge on monoconscious fluffy feminists and fluffies in general. A man who is well informed of masculist ideas, who also knows feminist ideas, in brackets, that is, he is bi-conscious, is in a position not only to answer back to the critiques of men by feminists using his masculist ideas, but to crush these feminist critiques, since masculist ideas are so much more powerful than feminist ideas, since many of the ways that women oppress men last decades, as stated above. Masculists are now in a position to punch back very effectively with the masculist bam 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 critique of women, which is so effective it often stops women in their tracks, blowing the wind out of their sails, often not so much due to the content of the masculist arguments, in brackets, although that is certainly partly true, but due to the strength of the conviction, the anger and hatred with which masculisted men express these arguments. Women, fluffies, fluffy feminists, soon see, once they have been confronted by such masculist public critiques, that something has changed. Men now seem to have lost their passive resignation towards the feminist critique of men and appear to have a new energy, a new confidence, a new anger, a new hatred that is frightening to women, to feminists, since they are probably deeply aware at some unconscious level that if ever men become collectively angry at women, then God help women. Well, that moment has arrived, which is what this flyer is largely about. So, What has changed with men? The answer is that we are now intellectually armed with our own gender political ism called masculism, with masculist ideas, which when delivered with a 1, 2, 3 punch, with a bam, bam, bam approach to women, really stops women in their tracks. To make this concrete, imagine the following scene, where a masculist confronts a feminist, or a fluffy, and floors her with his bam, bam, bam masculist critique of women, which is so powerful that it takes the wind out of her sails. I'll present what happens in the form of a dialogue. F, that's female feminist. Then I'll use female voice for F. So F. Men have always oppressed women. Look at rape. Look at men's condescension of women, treating women as chattels, not giving women basic rights to vote, to divorce, to own property, etc., etc. M, that's man or masculist. I don't deny any of that. As a masculist, I'm bi-conscious. That is, I've had both my feminist and my masculist consciousnesses raised. In fact, I've probably read more feminist books than you have, but since I'm bi-conscious, I'm very aware that women oppress men far worse. F. That's ridiculous. If you keep saying such things, I'm walking away. I'm a feminist. I know a lot about how men oppress women. M. As I said, I know those things too, due to my bi-consciousness, but due to your monoconsciousness, that is, you've only had your feminist consciousness raised, you know nothing about masculism, about how women oppress men, and in fact worse than vice versa. Your monoconsciousness means you have no basis for comparison, since you can't compare how men oppress women with how women oppress men when you are unaware of how women oppress men. To keep things quick, here is the bam 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 sound bite from the masculists that represent the masculist big three arguments that show women clearly how women oppress men, and worse than vice versa. I'll give you just the headlines first, and we can discuss a bit further if you want. Here are the big three in compact form, in bam 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 format. 1. Women's decades-lasting man slavery. 2. Women's butchery of one father in 4 in the fluffy feminist controlled divorce courts. 3. Women's forced fatherhood. F. I've not heard these before. You had better explain. M. Which one do you want to start with? F. What is it that you call man-slavery? M. Men gave women science-based medicine, so today's women have a life expectancy of 85 years. Men gave women the pill, household gadgets, higher education. So women, even those women who stay at home for some years to look after small kids, still have a career window of half a century. So masculists put enormous moral pressure on women to fit up, that is, become FIPs, equals financially independent persons, by bothering to get career competent educations at high school and college, so that they can be FIPs as adults and not expect fluffy style, in brackets, fluffy, equals traditional woman who expects to live off the money and labour of a man for decades, thus manslaving him for decades of his life, making her a man-slaver and hated by the masculists. Masculists point the finger at women, telling them that, quote, now that you women can work, you must work, since anything else is man-slavery, and man-slavery will get you killed, end quote. Masculists see man-slavery as 1,000 times bigger problem than was Negro slavery in the US in the 1800s, since there were several million Negro slaves at the time, And there are several billion man-slaves in the world today whom the masculists are out to liberate, telling them that women have to fib up and share equally the burden of earning the living by bothering to fib up or be severely punished by masculisted men by not getting one, thus forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and viciously rejected by masculisted men for being immoral, parasitic, man-slaving vermin, to be wiped out by being totally ignored, not even pumped and dumped, whose fluffy genes are removed from the gene pool, being seen as decades-lasting, man-slaving parasites, as man-slavers. F. As a woman, and I think speaking for most women, what you just said is terribly threatening to women, because we women want babies and need a man to help pay for them and for the house to raise them in, etc. You are truly scaring me. M. Good. That is the masculist strategy, to force women to fib up or rot on the shelf. Do you know how one father in 4 is butchered in the Fluffie Feminist controlled divorce courts? F. Go ahead. You're going to tell me anyway. M. Yes. One father in 4 gets butchered in the hated, in brackets, by masculists, Fluffie Feminist controlled divorce courts. He will lose his kids with a 90% probability, lose his house to his ex-wife so she can raise her kids in it. He'll lose half his wealth and stuff to her, forced to pay her for his kids whom he'll barely be allowed to see. And if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and fib up. So she continues to parasite off him after the divorce as before the divorce, thus manslaving him for decades. This is the end of part 1.